So now in my new hat and working with the private sector, we are working with companies to help them through BYOD, because this is not just a government thing. I mean, matter of fact, companies are trying to catch up now. You know, companies are moving as fast as they can to bring BYOD to the corporate world. And I think the government probably is going to be looking to the private sector as far as some case studies and lessons learned and so forth. And so the government has enormous challenges, just like the private sector has. So I'm going to hit a couple of things that the private sector has been struggling with, because they're the exact same things that the government's going to be struggling with, but maybe the private sector is just a little bit ahead of the curve, if you will, is finding out how very difficult these privacy and legal considerations are. So there is the assumption that this is a cost efficiency initiative, that you're going to reduce government costs when you implement BYOD. Not so much. And industry's finding out that and they don't even pretend that it is cost cutting. You'll see people in industry say, look, we're doing this for morale purposes, convenience purposes, it just makes sense. But is it saving a whole lot of money? Probably not. And why? Because these legal and privacy consideration issues, at least in the short run, are going to cost, they're going to take some resources, and maybe the way to say it, in the short run, it's not going to save money. The long run, maybe so. And of course, we can have a big debate about that. But I know the federal CIO has made comments about this as a cost-cutting initiative, and the private sector is finding that not necessarily to be the case. So what are these huge privacy concerns? I mean, some of them are rather obvious. I mean, you have a lot of personal data, right? You have a lot of personal things on your device. And the government doesn't really want their sensitive information mixed with your personal information. So a lot of companies have actually started policies whereby they're prohibiting certain types of information to be on your personal device. So companies, for example, are prohibiting sensitive proprietary data to be on your personal device. So right there we got a problem, right? Trying to segregate proprietary or corporate sensitive information from non-corporate sensitive information. I mean, some people would argue everything's corporate sensitive information. Are you kidding me? And why should you have any of this stuff on your personal device? Software programs are being companies are taking their software programs for security purposes and putting them on your personal device. Again, you might be thinking, well, wow, I thought this was my personal device, and now I got all this corporate software on here. All of a sudden, it doesn't look like my personal device. So, and then you become concerned with respect to what kind of access does the company have to your personal private information. Generally speaking, they don't want your personal private information, but guess what? They might end up looking at it for some other corporate reason. So the classic case, and the case that the government is going to have to deal with here, are breach investigations, right? There's been some type of breach. There's been some type of security breach. Government information is now out in the public domain. How did that happen? Oh, can we look at your device? If it's government issued, it becomes a little bit easier, right, for the government to pull it back and take hold of it. If it's a private personal device, you can imagine that the legal considerations get to be a little bit more questionable. The whole thing here is expectation of privacy. If you have a government-issued device, you probably don't have the same expectation of privacy as you do with, this is my device, you can't have it. There is a Supreme Court case. There has been some legal activity in this, going all the way up to the Supreme Court, believe it or not. But the case deals with a government-issued device. So this is the City of Ontario, California, giving a government-issued device, an iPhone or something, to a police officer. The police officer uses that for personal purposes, some inappropriate purposes, text messaging and so forth, both on and off duty. The government conducts an investigation. The government says, we want our device back. It's a government device. Give us our device back, and we're going to take a look at what's going on here. There's a big issue of personal privacy. The argument, even with the government devices, I have a right to personal privacy. I have an expectation of privacy that you can't be looking at my personal stuff, regardless of whether it was on or off duty. The Supreme Court, it was a very interesting decision because, unfortunately, the court did not really get to the issue of whether there was an expectation of privacy. Sort of, I'm a little curious how they punted that basic issue, but they did. But they did say, they focused on the reasonableness of the search. They said it was reasonable for the government to search. It was reasonable because it was a government-issued device. It was the issue was related to government work. It was reasonable for them to take it and to search it. So it was really a question of reasonableness of the search as opposed to, is there an expectation of privacy? Now, I would argue that in this was a government-issued device, remember. In the world of BYOD, come on, we all know you're going to have a stronger expectation of privacy. And I think it's questionable whether the government can just take that away from you and say, we're going to look at all your private stuff here. Or maybe we'll look at it by accident. You know, we might actually look at your private information. We might lose your private information by accident. Something could happen in these breach investigations. So what are companies doing to reduce the expectation of privacy? Well, they're doing waivers. You know, and that's better than not having one at all. I mean, you know they're going to challenge, people are going to challenge the waiver and say, you know, it's not legally sufficient and the guy didn't know what he was signing. But if you don't have one, you're really in trouble. So the waivers are very important where the employee says, hey, look, I know my personal information may be subject to review, it may be compromised, and I waive my privacy rights. So the waivers become very important, and you're going to see more of them, I'm sure, in the future. There's also, companies are also training people on the use of BYOD. This is, believe it or not, a lot of companies had no training on this whatsoever, and now are saying, we better train employees, and we, in that training, try to reduce their expectations of privacy with respect to their own personal device. If they want to use their personal device, there's going to be a reduction in the expectation of privacy. So this has been, these are pretty basic things and have been fairly effective. And I think you're going to see the government doing more of that. It's inevitable. And the bottom line, you can expect that if you are using your personal device for government purposes, that you're going to have a reduced expectation of privacy, and more than likely the government's going to want to take that a device away from you if there is an investigation, if there's a security breach investigation. This is where the legal and privacy concerns are absolutely paramount, and where the government is not going to want the answer to be, it's my personal device, you can't have it. And I'm sure that there's going to be more litigation, there's going to be more court cases in this whole area. But right now, the main court case is the Supreme Court case that I referred to, City of Ontario versus Kwan, 2010. And since then, we have not had any other cases on this point.